As Democrats continue to pursue the impeachment of President Trump, big tech is using the very same justification to increase its censorship activities on the internet. As you know by now, Twitter and Facebook banning the president from its platforms, all but eliminating his voice in the modern age. Then, Apple and Google pulling the plug on the new app known as Parler, with Amazon finishing the job by closing off its servers. This all happening almost simultaneously, only to be met with near silence from those who want to make it an issue about President Trump instead of looking at the dangerous precedent that these actions set. Joining us now to help us better understand the issue and a possible response is Representative Greg Steube, the congressman serving Florida's 17th district. So, Congressman, 1 week ago, you and I were talking about the threat of censorship, and since then, we have seen an escalation. So what's your response to what we've seen?
Well, it's like every day we take a step closer. We have Democrats now telling us that we have to wear face masks on the floor of the House of Representatives, the House of the People, or we're going to be fined $500. It's going to come out of our pay for the first event. The second event will be $2,500. These companies, I just got an email yesterday, the day before, from a Tea Party organization in my district that MailChimp has completely shut down their organization's ability to send out emails claiming that they're they're sending out fraudulent information. I mean, this is ridiculous that we've gotten to a point where these big, huge tech companies are cranking down on what they believe, their opinion on what they believe should be happening in our country and silencing voices of millions of Americans. It's a very dangerous place that we're in right now in our country.
And I'm glad you brought up the other examples, too, because I don't want to just get necessarily caught up in just the tech aspect, because you're right. For example, PayPal has been known to eliminate different payment methods to people who claim to be conservatives. We also saw that, for example, the Trump campaign got their service shut down for their contributions. I believe that the company's name is Stripe. There are things outside of tech within itself that are becoming problematic, and I think a lot of conservatives would say that it's discriminatory. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. It's 100% discriminatory based on conservatives. You're seeing airlines also put people on do not fly lists that may have just been at the rally, not partaked in the violence or entered the Capitol. Look, I've said all along that anybody that entered the Capitol and violated the law and committed a crime should absolutely be punished. But the people should also be punished that desecrated our monuments, that tore down buildings, that burned churches here in Washington. I don't care what organization you're a part of or what you're affiliated with. If you've committed a crime, you should be held accountable. But we now have big, huge private companies and businesses deciding what side of the political spectrum they're on and punishing people who aren't on the side of the political spectrum that they're on.
And so what is your suggestion then for how conservatives can deal with this? I know that, for example, if we talk about tech and the First Amendment on the internet, a lot of people will bring up Section 230. But as we're laying out right now, it's not just necessarily when it comes to freedom of speech on the internet. There are other things taking place as well. So do you think that these are two subjects that should be looked at separately? For example, the payment methods and the banks, things on one side, and on the other hand, maybe deal with Twitter, Facebook, things like that separately?
Yeah, I filed a bill in Section 230 that will go right after the big tech companies as it relates to censorship. The challenge that we have is the House of Representatives is run by Speaker Pelosi, and we're in the minority. So we can't get any bill brought up in any committee unless the Democratic chair wants to bring it up. We can't get any bill brought up on the floor of the House of Representatives unless Speaker Pelosi wants it brought up. So we as a minority members of this House have very little that we can do other than continue to educate the American people about all of these things that are going on, encourage them to get involved in the political process, and encourage them to help us take the House back in 2022. Because as long as Speaker Pelosi's at the helm, I seriously doubt that you're going to see any of these things resolved.
And, you know, it wasn't too long ago either where Democrats were actually the ones who were calling for greater scrutiny against these tech companies. I remember during the primary, Bernie Sanders, for example, Senator Elizabeth Warren were saying that companies such as Facebook, such as Twitter, should be broken up, saying that they were essentially monopolies. And even right now, we see, I think it's 48 different states that are suing Facebook based on antitrust policies. So do you think that perhaps this is something where Republicans and Democrats can get together? Or do you feel like the latest moves that we've seen almost appear to be an olive branch to Democrats, acknowledging the fact that they did take back Congress?
Well, it's interesting, all of the talk early in Congress about cranking down on these big tech companies. You haven't heard any of that as of late. I sit on the Judiciary Committee on the subcommittee for antitrust, and early on in the year, Chair Cicilline, who's a Democrat out of Rhode Island, brought up an entire hearing about breaking up big tech for antitrust violations. You haven't heard much of that as of late. I hope that this is an area that Republicans and Democrats can work together on, because obviously Democrats have problems with big tech companies as it relates to antitrust. And Republicans have issues with big tech companies as it relates to Section 230 and liability protection. So I am hopeful that in this Congress, the Republicans and Democrats can come together on reining in these big companies from censoring Americans and doing the things that they're doing that's just not American. It's completely undemocratic.
And I do want to build on that part right there, what's un-American and what's not democratic, because a lot of people are concerned right now that perhaps the events on January 6th are going to be used as a pretext for further government overreach. We know that the Biden transition team, for example, is looking at a new law that would allow them to examine extremism. Even though there's already laws on the books, a lot of critics would say that it's about enforcing those laws, not making new ones. But a lot of people are concerned that this is going to be used as a pretext to perhaps violate civil liberties, whether it's something like the Patriot Act once again, or kind of going after these private organizations. Do you fear that that could be the case?
It's happening right now as we sit here. Just today, we got notification that if you're going to go on the House floor, members of the House are going to have to go through a magnetometer so that none of us, pursuant to our Second Amendment rights, will be permitted to carry on the floor. If we're not wearing a face mask on the House floor, we're going to be fined $500. So look no further than the floor of the very House of Representatives elected by this people, of the now using January 6th as an instance to then violate our First Amendment rights and then violate our Second Amendment rights. And you're going to see that once Joe Biden takes office, you're going to see these orders on these mask mandates, on cranking down on all these different things across the country. And it's it's an un-American, it's undemocratic. This isn't the way of America. And the mass majority of Americans in this country see this for what it is and don't support the direction that we're going.
It's a really good point, actually, because, I mean, I think when you look back over the past 4 years, there were times where even the president's critics were calling on him to really take control over certain situations, use the National Guard, for example, in cities, and he did resist that at times. But, for example, even Democrats were calling for him to impose a national mask mandate or close down businesses all across the country from a federal level. And say what you want about President Trump, but he resisted those temptations. And I don't think there's many people in politics who would resist a power grab. So do you fear that we may now be seeing the complete opposite of that, where perhaps there are power grabs that aren't warranted?
Oh, like I said, you're seeing it in the House of Representatives today with what's going on. And as a justification for that, they're using January 6th. I think you're going to see COVID as a justification for all the things that we've seen happen across this country, the lockdowns, the shutdowns. Never in the history of our country would I have thought that I would have seen our government telling private businesses that they cannot operate a business that they may have had in their family for generations. That's the place that we are in America today, and they're using COVID as an excuse, and up here in the Capitol, you're using January 6th as an excuse. And mark my words, we're going to see when Biden takes over, they're going to use that as an excuse to go after our Second Amendment rights as well.
And, you know, there is a level of hypocrisy here, too, because, for example, you'll hear some of the president's critics say, well, these are private companies. They can do what they want. They should have their own freedom to do exactly how they want to practice their business, while at the same time saying, you know what, we're in a pandemic. These businesses have to listen to the government. They have to close. This is a mandate that we're taking from Washington, D.C. You can't really have both at the same time. So do you think that Republicans should make something such as 230, or maybe just an enforcement mechanism, something to combat what's happening in Silicon Valley, and make it a more pivotal part of their platform?
Well, I actually started to understand. I agreed with, hey, these are private companies. We should leave them alone, until you start reading the law and the Supreme Court decisions on the issues. The moment that Congress gave them protection under Section 230 to be able to do whatever they want to do and not have legal liability and be immune from liability is the moment that they are acting as a government surrogate. And there's Supreme Court case law on it. I'd be happy to send your viewers the specific sites so they can read it for themselves. The moment that they've done that, they are now acting like government actors, and they're restricting your First Amendment rights. They're acting as editorial boards. They're acting like newspapers and news media. And if they are, then they should lose the benefits of the liability protection of Section 230, period.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, they're getting the best of both worlds, and they can't have it both ways. You can either be a public utility or a common carrier, however you want to describe that, or you can act as a publisher. But if you do, you can't have that liability shield. It's just a way that you can't have both. I mean, you have to pick one or the other, and these companies right now are in that gray zone. And I think that you're right to say that there has to be a determination on how to treat them moving forward. But Congressman Greg Steube, it's always a pleasure having you on this program. Thanks for coming on tonight.